folks, Paul Abernathy here. Welcome to another episode of Fast Trax Live based on the Fast Trax programs here at Electrical Code Academy. Today's lesson, we're going to take us back to some fundamentals. We're going to talk about receptacle placement rules. Now, we're not going to cover every possible scenario, but we're going to cover the main concept of receptacle placements in dwelling units. And so if you haven't figured it out by now, we're going to be looking at 210.52 and talking about the different requirements for general receptacle placements. Now, obviously, in upcoming videos, we'll talk about the spacing on a kitchen counters and all those type of things. Right now, we're talking about general receptacle spacing and placement. That's what the focus is of today's lesson. So let's go on and get into the lesson. Oh, and I should remind you that if you are looking for a program to really learn the National Electrical Code, we have them over here at fasttracksystem.com. Great illustrations, great call outs. You get to join me 2 times a month on Wednesday nights to ask questions you may encounter. We have a great message board for them. And if you get the enhanced program, you also get access to exclusive videos over on Fast Trax Tube, our exclusive video platform. So there's the website. Make sure you check it out. All right, let's go on and get into today's lesson. All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is something that I feel electricians should just lock into their memory, all of these rules that we're going to talk about today. Even though I'm going to give code references like we always do, you've got our little chevrons. You're supposed to stop, pause, and go look it up in the code. We'll do that as well. But what we're talking about is general receptacle placement today. We are not talking about placement in bathrooms near the sink. We're not talking about kitchens and serving the countertop. We're not talking about islands and peninsulas today. It's just the general receptacle placements. That's what today's topic is about. All right, so if you're in our Fast Trax program, this is obviously in Unit 6. And these are under the general provision section. And remember, we have 19 units in our program, and we go really deep, not only calculations, but also things like this, receptacle placements. All right, so let's look at the material we have here. All right, so general requirements. So it says the wall spacing determines the minimum number of receptacles in a given dwelling, okay? So the wall spacing, and of course the VA per square foot. And again, we have to start placing these receptacles. It says receptacle outlets shall be installed in kitchens, family rooms, dining rooms, living rooms, parlors, libraries, dens, sunrooms, bedrooms, recreational rooms, or similar rooms or areas similar to all those we just mentioned, in accordance with the provisions specified in 210.52a. Okay, so there's our code. Now, we're not talking about the ones that are serving the countertop again in kitchens when you see the reference to kitchens, okay? That type of thing. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the general spacing requirements around the room. That's what today's topic is about. All right, so here's our typical graphic, as you've seen before in many of our graphics. Really good call outs. This is a long room, and you see here's an opening. This breaks the floor line, this opening here. And so you can go up to 6 feet, and you have to have a receptacle within 6 feet. So there it is at 6 feet. And we'll see all that in the code and look at the references, but I'm just kind of giving you the overview now. Now, I can go up to 12 feet to the next receptacle. Why? Because if I go right here in the center of that 12 feet, I'm within 6 feet of the receptacle on the left, and I'm within 6 feet of this receptacle on the right. Okay, you're going to see where that's covered in the code as well. And of course, you see that you'll have some sliding doors. You'll see that later. You have open doors. Again, the measurement is from the fixed panel of a sliding door, or again, here you see where the panel starts, or where the door starts right here, within 6 feet. And then you can go up to 12 feet. Then you can go another 12 feet. But then you have to have one within 6 feet of this opening. Don't worry, we're going to cover all of this as we look at the different call-outs. But that's our basic rule. Now, we refer to that in the industry as the 6 foot, 12 foot rule. Okay, 6 foot from any opening, and then you can go up to 12 feet, that type of thing, before you have the next receptacle outlet. Okay, now when we say receptacle outlet, folks, we're talking about the box that is in the wall that the receptacle device mounts into. That's going to be an important concept for you to understand, especially when you get to islands and peninsulas later, either in our Fast Tracks program or as you learn the NEC. So the receptacles are devices. They mount in an outlet box, okay? All right, so let's look at A. The call out A is going right here, and it's going right here. All right, so what is it says? Receptacles shall be installed so that no point measured horizontally along the floor line of any wall space is more than 6 feet from a receptacle outlet. And where is that? That comes out of 210.52A1, okay? So we're gonna go to the code and see what that's talking about. So let's go real quick to the code and just verify it. All right, we're in 210.52. Here's A, here's your general provisions, right? And A1 spacing. And it says, a receptacle shall be installed such that no point measured horizontally along the floor line of any wall space is more than 6 feet from a receptacle outlet. All right, so that's exactly what we did in our illustration. Okay, so this is our floor layout. This is the door coming in here on the left. This is the, whoops, hold on here. This is the door coming in on the left. So here's where it starts. You can go up to 6 feet right here. So if I put anything in this space right here, it's going to be within 6 feet of a receptacle, okay? And then I can go up to 12 feet. And if I go right in the middle, I'm going to be within 6 feet of this receptacle, or I'm going to be 6 feet of that receptacle. So that's where we get the maximum distance is 12 feet, because any point along that 12-foot span, no matter where I put a lamp, for example, I'm going to be within 6 feet of a receptacle, okay? That's what it's talking about. All right, so that's what you see. Now, C says the general receptacle replacement requirements for 125 volt, 15 to 20 ampere receptacle outlets are in 210.52, okay? So the placement, not replacement, excuse me, placement. So all of 210.52A is going to tell us where we put these. So we're going to walk through this so that you can see that. Now, here's an interesting note we want to talk about right here. Right, this is an interesting note. And I'll remind you, our Fast Tracks program is riddled with notes, cautions, things that stand out, the interesting notes to help you learn, some discussions. And notice it says dwelling unit receptacle outlet general provisions specified in 210.52 apply to any part of the basement containing a habitable room, such as dens, recreation room, etc. A lot of confusion that people have is, what about basements? And if it's an unfinished basement, then you obviously don't have a spacing requirement. But the 3 VA per square foot is taking up the space, and that accounts for the receptacles that you would be adding. When you go to finish that space off, then guess what? Then you're going to make sure your spacing is 6 foot, 12 foot spacing, whether it's in the basement, whether it's in the den or rec room or whatever. 6 foot, 12 foot rules are going to come into play. Now, there is a caution here, and I'll also show you this in the NEC. There are certain locations where you would put a receptacle that are not going to meet the spacing rules. It doesn't mean you can't have them. They're in addition to the spacing requirement. So again, as it says right here, you could have a receptacle that's part of a luminaire or appliance that's in that room. That doesn't matter. That's just in addition. You still have to meet the 6 foot, 12 foot spacing rules. This is just in addition, okay? What's next? Control by a listed wall-mounted control device in accordance with 210.70A1, exception number 1, okay? So what's that mean is, instead of switching a luminaire in a bedroom, for example, I'm just using a bedroom, I could switch a receptacle. However, I can't switch the entire receptacle, because if I switch that entire receptacle, it's now not going to be in place to meet the spacing requirement. Nothing says I can't switch the receptacle in lieu of a luminaire under this exception, but it's not going to take the place of the spacing. So how do we typically get around that if we want to switch a receptacle instead of putting a luminaire, let's say in a bedroom, and meet that requirements of 210.70A1? Then what we do is we break the tabs on it, and the top part stays hot all the time, and the bottom part, we switch it, okay? And so that's how you get around it. Because when it comes to spacing of these receptacles, it doesn't necessarily say it has to be a duplex receptacle. It could be a simplex, single receptacle, and still meet the rule. I think most people are just going to put duplex receptacles in there. But again, it's important that you understand that that's a receptacle outlet rule when it comes to the spacing. And a single receptacle or a duplex is still a receptacle device going in a receptacle outlet. You with me? Okay. Next, it says located in cabinets or cupboards. What that means is, even though I might have a receptacle that you install inside of a cabinet, and you might say, hey, it's within the 12-foot span, it cannot be used to meet the spacing rules. It doesn't mean you can't have one in a cabinet for maybe a specific item you're putting in there, like a DVD player or whatever, but it can't meet the required spacing rule. So if you want to put one inside of a cabinet or cupboard, that's okay. It's just not going to use that receptacle to meet the spacing requirement. All right. And then lastly, this one, any receptacle that's located more than 5.5 feet above the floor doesn't mean you can't have one, but it's not going to be used to meet the spacing rule. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, well, what if I'm running the receptacles around my bedroom, Paul, and I want to put a receptacle up high for a flat screen TV? Can that receptacle meet the spacing rules? Answer is yes, if it's not over 5.5 feet from the floor. And again, so if you want to do that, then you're going to have to measure it out. I think what most people do is they probably have a receptacle down low and they'll just add a receptacle up high. But in new construction, you pretty much can do whatever you want. But if you have one that's up, say for a flat screen TV that's 6 feet high from the floor, then that cannot meet the 6-foot, 12-foot spacing rule. You'd end up having to put one down lower, okay, that would fall within that 6-foot, 12-foot spacing rule in order to meet that. Okay? So just want to make everything clear when it comes to that. And you'll see some examples here anyway. This comes straight out of the NEC, by the way. All right. So the next thing that we look at is 210.52A21, and that is the wall spacing requirement. So obviously in that room we showed all of those spaces were they were at least 24 inches, okay? So what happens if you have a small space? Let's say it's between the entry into a bedroom and a closet, and you have a small wall space that's, say, in this case, 23 inches. Then you would not be required to have a receptacle in that wall space. Now, it might be from a design perspective worth doing, but it's not going to be required for that small space. Now, if it's 24 inches or more, then you're going to have a receptacle in there. So it's kind of weird for some people. If it's 23, no. If it's 26, yes. See what I'm saying? So what does the code say? And we'll go look at the code for this one just so you can kind of put it together with the NEC. And we're going to follow our rules. And our rules are we're going to make sure that we look at these chevrons. Okay? All right, so it says a receptacle is required for any wall space 2 feet or more in width, including space measured around corners, unbroken along floor lines by doorways or similar openings. Another opening would be like a fireplace opening, or stationary appliances, or fixed cabinets that do not have a countertop or a work surface on top of it. Okay, so I could have a fixed cabinet that's built into the wall. That's going to break my measurement horizontally along the floor line. Same as the opening in the fireplace would break it, that type of thing. Or an opening in a doorway, that's going to break it and start my measurement over again. Okay, so not required to have a receptacle in any space that is what? Less than 2 feet. Now, maximum distance, you heard me talk about it at the beginning, 6-foot, 12-foot rule. So this is a great way to show the illustration here. And this is, again, is another example of our program really kind of saying, look, I get it. Many people don't understand 6-foot, 12-foot, no differently than they don't understand 2-foot, 4-foot rule for countertops and kitchens. So they look at this and go, I need a visual. Well, here's a visual. So look at A call out is talking about these lamps. And notice how these lamps are positioned against the wall. And they have typically, let's say, a 6-foot cord. So this says, as an easy way to understand the placement of a dwelling receptacle is to imagine having a floor lamp with a 6-foot cord. Anywhere that lamp is placed around the wall, there should be a receptacle within reach. Without using an extension cord, even when placed beside a door opening, an outlet should be within reach. If the lamp is placed next to the wall that is at least 24 inches wide, an outlet should be available within that wall space. So that's why. So if you have a 2-foot wall space, you could have a little table there with a lamp on it. And we do not want you to be trying to use extension cords, especially not those little brown 2-wire extension cords, okay? You pick them up at the checkout at the Home Depot and Lowe's. No. So here's just a great visualization. So here's your receptacle. You can go up to 12 feet to the next one. And at any point on this wall that I put that lamp, I'm going to be within 6 feet. If I put it here, I'm going to be within 6 feet of this one. If I put it here, I'm going to be within 6 feet of this one. That's what we call the 6-foot, 12-foot rule. Okay, now, do you have to go all the way to 12 feet? Absolutely not. If you want to go and put a receptacle every 4 feet, that's up to you. Okay, the maximum you can't go is 6 feet from an opening or a break in the floor line, and the maximum between receptacles can't be more than 12 feet, okay? Now, let's look at B. So B is also pointing down to these lamps, and it says, the maximum distance to any receptacle along this floor line of any wall, okay, shall be 6 feet. So we just read that in the code a second ago. So no matter where he puts it, I'm going to have a receptacle within 6 feet. That's how we do the 6-foot, 12-foot spacing rule. Now, you remember what we said about measurement around walls, around corners? Okay, so this is another example right here. So this is a receptacle here, and you can go 3 feet to the edge, then there's another 4 feet here, and there's another 5 feet to get to this one. You add this up, that's a maximum of 12 feet. Now, with designs, you don't have to go because it could make a room look funky. So most electricians will space a room out to be aesthetically pleasing. Just understanding that you can't go more than 12 feet between receptacles. And you can't go more than 6 feet from any opening in the wall space. Okay? Now, when we're measuring around that room, you come upon a sliding door with a fixed panel. So one side is going to be fixed and one side is going to be slide. The part that slides is the break in the wall space. The part that's fixed, you treat just like wall space. So example here, as you can see right here, this is the fixed panel on this side, and this is the sliding one here. So right here at the base of that fixed panel, right here, measure in this way, you measure, and you can't go more than 6 feet away before you have to have a receptacle. Now, can that receptacle be at 4 feet away, 5 feet away, 5.5 feet, or 6 feet? Absolutely. It just can't be more than 6 feet. And so that sliding panel, you treat it like a wall space. Make sense? It's the part that slides is the break in the wall line. So you can see over here on the other side, the measurement starts from right here. You go up to 6 feet. Anywhere in here you could actually put it. And then from that receptacle, you can go a maximum of 12 feet to the next one. Because again, nowhere in that wall space can be more than 6 feet from a receptacle. No matter what you put, whether it's a lamp or whether it's a piece of equipment or whatever, okay? A stereo or whatever you do, okay? And that's pretty much what these call outs. And again, in our Fast Tracks program, for those that are really wanting to hammer these things home, and so you start creating this memory that you start remembering things, it is right here, okay? And that's going to be your reference. And you're going to stop. You're going to pause, you're going to go to your code book. So this is what we call ballistic training. And also, it's one of those things where when you do this over and over and over again, you're going to become better at it. And that's just going to be certain things that when you go to take an exam, if you're taking an exam, then you're just going to be regurgitating this stuff because you got it up here. Now, if you're not taking an exam and you're in our Mastering the NEC program, these things are going to teach you that when you're out there in the field, you're going to make less mistakes. And it means you're going to have less failed inspections. You're going to be more intelligent to have a conversation with an electrical inspector because you know the code rules. You know how to apply them. And then you've got great illustrations. Now, the other beautiful thing about our program is that when you're out in the field, you actually could pull up your course on your phone and show the inspector and say, look, they want to learn too. So you give you an opportunity to educate them. Sometimes you run into an inspector who doesn't want to learn, and that's a sad thing. But you have all of this available on your mobile device if you're in our Fast Tracks program. Now, what happens if you run into fixed dividers? In this case, it's a fixed nailed in place divider that's maybe dividing a living room from a family room or something like that. Well, as you can see here, 210.52A23 is talking about these fixed dividers. Could be a rail like this. It could be a freestanding bar that breaks up two spaces. Okay, well, in this case, this would be a fixed room divider. Why is this significant? Well, that fixed room divider acts like what? It acts like a wall. So you'd have to have a receptacle within 6 feet of the end. Now, interesting thing about this is people say, well, where the hell do I put it? Well, this is an example where you would have no choice but to put it in the floor. Not all boxes are rated to be used or listed to be used as floor boxes. So you have to use a listed floor box because it's designed to handle the weight of people potentially stepping on it. And it also has certain types of design that keeps things that might be spilled from getting in. So it's a specific listed device. So you can't use just any old nail up box, throw it in the floor, throw a receptacle in it and be done. No, it's got to be the listed floor box. All right, so there you go. Also, that listed floor box will meet the wall space requirement as long as that floor box is installed within 18 inches of the wall. So it doesn't have to be right up against the wall. It can be up to 18 inches away from the wall. And it would still be sufficient to meet the wall spacing rule, even though it's not technically in the wall. Okay? And where do we get that allowance? Right here. Another chevron. I'll show it to you right here. Let's highlight it. 210.52A3. And so this can also come in handy. People ask me all the time, say, Paul, I've got a house. It's a really fancy house. And one of the walls is glass. And the entire wall is glass. What am I supposed to do? Well, you're going to have to put them in the floor. There is no way to get around the wall spacing requirement. So just because somebody might design it difficult, you're still going to have to meet the rules. And so if it's a concrete slab, then let's heaven forbid that you waited too long or you weren't informed of this glass wall, because then you're going to end up having to go in there and start chipping up some of the floor in order to get the circuit out there, because obviously you're still going to have those wall spacing requirements met, even if the whole wall was glass. There is no exception to that rule. Okay. So anyway, so let's go look at the code real quick. So that's 210.52A3. And let's see, 210.52A3. And let's see here, right here, floor receptacle. So what does it say? It says floor receptacle. The receptacle outlets in or on the floor shall not be counted as part of the required number of receptacle outlets unless it's located within 18 inches of the wall. Why is that also significant? Well, what if I want a receptacle in the floor out near, let's say, a couch or something that's out in the middle of the floor? Well, nothing says that you can't. You can add as many extra receptacles as you want. But remember what we said earlier? It can't count as meeting a floor spacing requirement unless that floor receptacle is within 18 inches of the wall. But if you want to have an additional one out in the middle of the floor, let's say for a coffee table or some kind of decorative table or next to the couch, you're more than willing to do that. You can do that. The code doesn't care. But it's not going to be meeting the wall space requirement. It's just an extra receptacle, and you're free to do that if you want. Nothing prohibits that. Okay, so that's what we just wanted to make sure you saw that and realize that wall spacing can also be achieved by floor receptacle outlets as well, as long as they're installed within 18 inches, okay? Also, you see down here, again, like we have in our programs, we have these great notes, and it says, not all types of receptacle boxes are suitable for floor installations. I kind of told you that earlier, but again, great note here. And there are different types of boxes that may be required. And again, there are specific floor boxes that are actually listed for this application, okay? And you have to install them in accordance with 314.27b. Again, we give you these notes and we give you these call outs. So again, I don't know any other program on the planet that does it like this, gives you interaction with me 2 times a month on Wednesday nights. You obviously can go to our message board and post questions. We're here for you. And that's what our programs are all about. So if you're not preparing for an exam and you just want to get better at the NEC, and you all should want to get better at the NEC, we have non-exam prep related courses as well called Mastering the NEC. It's all available on our website right there, fasttracksystem.com. Okay. All right, now you heard me talk about, can I have other receptacles as well, even though they're not there to meet the spacing requirement? Absolutely, I can. So look at here. It says luminaires or appliances with a built-in receptacle are permitted, but these receptacles do not count as the required receptacles for spacing. Now you saw that at the beginning when we looked at the requirements in the code and we said, hey, wait, can a receptacle that's over 5.5 feet be counted in the floor space, in the wall space requirement? No, it can't. Could a receptacle that's built into an appliance or built into a piece of equipment, or built into a luminaire, can that meet the spacing requirement? Absolutely not, okay? What about one inside of a cabinet? Absolutely not. Now, can I have one in a cabinet? Absolutely you can. Another good example of this is in kitchens, right? So we're not talking about the kitchen countertop. This is a great example of additional ones here. So we're not talking about the kitchen countertop. We're talking about around the kitchen in the wall spacing, which has to meet these rules right here, okay? So we're talking about the same applicable wall spacing requirement in a kitchen, in a dining room, okay? Same in a nook, same wall space requirement. Again, we're not talking about the small appliance branch circuits that's in the terms of the counter. Still on the small appliance branch circuit, but we're talking about the wall spacing requirements in 210.52a. Not the requirements in 210.52b or c. We're not talking about those. Okay, so those receptacles. What if I have a receptacle that's above the cove, say, of my cabinets, and I want to put some like LED lighting up there? Can I put a receptacle up there? Absolutely, I can. Now, is that receptacle going to have anything to do with the spacing requirements? Absolutely not, but it can be up there. What about a receptacle if I want to put it in a cabinet? Okay, go for it. Will that receptacle meet the spacing requirement? Obviously, absolutely not, because it's inside of a cabinet. And that's what it said in the code. It says that's not going to be what happens. So that's just kind of a good illustration example. I can have receptacles all over the place if I want. Another great example is there's a lot of people that put deck receptacles, for example, up high for Christmas tree lighting in rooms. Maybe rooms that face the front and they want to put lighting around it. So they'll put receptacles up high next to their windows. Well, there's nothing that prohibits you from doing that. They just are going to be higher than 5.5 feet. So you can't use them for the spacing requirement, but most certainly can be up there as an option if you want to put them up high. And can it be on the same circuit as a general use? Absolutely it can. Absolutely. Remember, 210.52, we're talking about spacing requirements. We're not talking about what can't be on the general use branch circuit. We're just talking about where you put these devices. That's what we're talking about here. Don't get the two confused. All right, so let's go back real quick and tie up this lesson here. So as you can see, these great call outs right here. So it says luminaires and appliances with the built-in receptacles are permitted, but these receptacles do not count in the required spacing rules of 210.52. Absolutely, 100% agree. A call out, this one up here is up real high. I guess this one says it's 6 feet. So maybe somebody put it up 6 feet for a flat screen TV. Okay, so it says, although receptacles located more than 5.5 feet above the floor are permitted, they are not counted in my requirements of 210.52 for the wall space. So I would have to install one like this one down here, lower, right here, because this one is too high. So to meet the spacing, I would have to install one lower. Okay, that meets the spacing. Now, what about this one inside of a cabinet? Well, B says, although receptacle outlets within cabinets or cupboards are permitted, and people do this all the time, they are not counted as the spacing requirement. So just because there's one in there, when you're doing your measurements and you're laying it out, you're walking it off during the rough in, and you're nailing up your boxes or whatever you're doing, don't anticipate one that's going to be in a cabinet to meet your spacing requirement. It's not. So you're going to have to install one in the wall. There is a note here. It says height requirements for wall receptacles are not defined. Now, what we mean by that is they don't tell you in the code that they got to be below a certain distance. The only thing we tell you is that they don't count for the wall spacing if they're higher than 5.5 feet. But we obviously will let you put them down low. We will let you put them in the floor. We'll let you put them up in the ceiling. It's whether or not they count for the wall spacing is where you're going to have the height requirements on that. But as far as where you want to put them, the NEC doesn't care. Put them in the ceiling, put them in the wall, put them in the floor. Doesn't matter. Just remember, again, and I'm redundant, and people hate my redundancy, but I do it for a reason. When it comes to the wall spacing, that 6 foot, 12 foot rule, we got to have them not higher than 5.5 feet. They can't be in a cabinet, okay? Those type of caveats. They can't be part of a luminaire or a piece of utilization equipment. They can't be into that. All those things, they can't be done and still meet the spacing requirements. Okay, just want to make sure that everybody is on board with that. Okay, and I guess lastly, I'll just say it also, you can't go into a room and switch the entire receptacle, right? So if I come in the room and I have one within 6 feet, and then I go to another one 12 foot away. At one that's 12 foot away, I cannot switch that entire receptacle. Because if I switch the entire receptacle, now I do not have a general use receptacle within 12 feet. I've got a switched receptacle within 12 feet. So the way I get around that is I'd have to break the tab. Half of that would be hot all the time. And then I could switch the bottom one or vice versa, top or bottom, it doesn't matter. You get me? Okay. That's what it's talking about. And that's the rules in 210.52, the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that are not to be considered meeting the spacing requirement. All right, so there you go. Now, same thing as that fixed in place railing. You also have an application here for the balcony. So this was very common in my house that I had back when I lived in Virginia. I had an entryway, and then it went up some stairs, and it overlooked the living room. But I had this railing, handrail, that came out from the wall. As I was going up the steps, there was a railing that came out. In this case, as you can see, there's two levels here. There's an upper level and a lower level. And maybe there's stairs that are leading up from an entry, let's say. Okay, doesn't really matter. The point is, this railing is a fixed wall space, okay? So you have to treat it as such. So let's look at what the code rules say. It says, a receptacle floor box must be listed specifically for use as a floor box. Okay, we saw that earlier, 314.27b. Okay, and it says a floor receptacle may be required if the balcony handrail is longer than 6 feet and the area is one listed in 210.52a. So living room, dining room, family room, all those areas that are listed, habitable rooms. If you have this rail there, you might be saying, well, it's not a wall. But as far as the National Electrical Code is concerned, that is fixed. That is a wall. And it might require you, if it is over 6 feet, it might require you to put a receptacle in the floor in order to be able to meet this rule. Okay? I mean, there's no other way to do it. It is still, and the reason also for that is, it is very common. In fact, it was at my house that there was actually, we put one of those really shallow tables with a lamp on it in front of this, okay? Because again, that is space that we wanted to put something there, okay? So we needed to have a receptacle there. So that's what was done, okay? The next one, it comes to spacing, and this is one that people ask about all the time, is electric baseboard heaters. Now, there was a guy over on YouTube who did a video, and I made a comment to him about spacing rules in one of his videos, and he wasn't talking about spacing, but I made a little comment about it, and the dude freaked out. And he said, oh, it's a hydronic one. It's not even electric. And I'm like, well, I don't know how I would know that. But the whole point that I brought it up was to give him the opportunity to explain to people the rules for spacing when you might have an electric baseboard heater. Now, it doesn't say specifically in black and white as far as something that is enforceable in the NEC that says that you can't have a receptacle over top of an electric baseboard heater. However, there are informational notes that are installed at locations in the code that say, you know what, we're going to tell you that you can't put that receptacle over top of an electric baseboard heater. But we're not going to tell you. What we're going to do is we're going to defer to the manufacturer of that baseboard heater. So that ultimately ends up being a 110.3b thing. So you go get the electric equipment, which is the electric baseboard heater, and you look at the instructions. And the instructions on most every electric baseboard heater I have ever seen will tell you to not install a receptacle outlet above an electric baseboard heater. And all I was doing was giving the gentleman an opportunity to expand on that. Now, as you can see in this illustration, let's say you have a very long baseboard heater. And it's an electric baseboard heater. And it's permanently mounted, screwed to the wall. Typically in the back of those, you pop the cover, you'll have mounting holes that you mount it to the wall. Now, it's still wall space. I still have to have a receptacle. Now, in this example here, that thing was 16 feet long. I have still got to have a receptacle in that space there, okay? So at the end of the day, if the instructions for the electric baseboard heater says that I can't install it above it, that's a 110.3b. The NEC doesn't say specifically, don't do it. It gives you some informational notes that tell you to check with the product listing. And so if the manufacturer says don't do it, then you got to figure something out. So it may mean that you break it down into two smaller baseboards. Maybe it's a hydronic or a water type baseboard heater. And then their rules are they're not 110.3b rules because it's a water-based one. It's not really electric. So again, it may not apply there. And so it's not going to be an issue. We're talking about electric baseboard heaters. So what I could do is I could break this up. Instead of it being 16 feet, I could break it up into two 8-foot pieces or whatever I need to do. But there's also another allowance for you to do this, okay? And I'm going to show you this. Also, by the way, here's the note, caution. It says, listed baseboard heaters include instructions that are part of their listing, by the way, that may not permit their installation below receptacle outlets. And you find this informational note in 210.52 as well as 424.10. So that's where you're going to see these informational notes that are going to say, hey, go check with the listing of the product. They probably have something to say about this. All right, so that's what you do. And if they say don't do it, you don't do it. So then you got to get creative and come up with something else. So you could put a floor receptacle, right? Because it's basically the manufacturer said don't install it above, but it didn't say anything about below it. It didn't say anything on the floor from it, 18 inches of the wall, so that's an option. Again, you could break it up and have two separate baseboards and then free up a space in the middle. But there is still another option, and I see this less often, is that you can find baseboard heaters that actually have a separate compartment built into the actual baseboard heater. Now, this receptacle that would be built into the baseboard heater, that separate compartment, you can't use the heating circuit to supply that receptacle. So you're going to have to come into the back of that separate compartment with your branch circuit for your spacing of your receptacles, your general use branch circuit. So there's usually knockouts in the back of it that you can come into it, okay? So you can't use the heating circuit, okay, which is probably typically 240-volt heating circuit more often than not always, but more often than not. So obviously you can't tap off that and use that to supply this receptacle. So it means that you're going to have a circuit for your baseboard heater, and you're going to have to bring a separate circuit in to of that small that general use branch circuit that you're going around the wall. You're going to have to come in and pop into that compartment, power that receptacle, and then leave and go on to the next receptacle. So they do make those. They're basically factory installed. You don't make them yourself. You buy it and it'll have a separate compartment to be able to do this. And that is very common in these really long baseboard heaters. Okay, so again, that is an option that you can utilize. Okay. All right. You see that receptacle boxes are what we're going to talk about in another video. So let's go on and bring it back to me. Those are the basics of general room spacing. Okay, dens, basements, okay, living rooms, things like that, family rooms, kitchen spacing. We're not talking about the countertop spacing. We're talking about the wall spacing requirements around the wall, not the countertop stuff. So these are things that you should just kind of lock in your memory, learn that 6-12-foot rule, understand what a break in the floor line is, understand when something is not considered a break and it's considered wall space, like the fixed portion of a sliding door, or a railing that is fixed in place that would be a wall space, and so it's going to require you to figure out how to put a receptacle in there. Also, remembering that receptacles inside of cabinets, higher than 5.5 feet, things like that, things that are built into equipment, not going to take the place of your normal spacing requirements. Okay? All right. Hopefully you got something out of that. And for everybody that watched it and says that I drug it out, then my programs aren't for you. Okay? If you like details, you like how I go into the detail, think about getting our Fast Tracks program. We really get into the weeds, great call outs, great code references, great illustrations. You get to join me on Wednesday nights 2 times a month to bring any question you want. Join the family. You got our message boards on our website. You get access for life. It never expires in our basic and enhanced program. And if you get our enhanced program, you can also get videos like these over on fasttrackstube.com all for that one price. We hope you'll check us out, and hopefully you've learned that we're a little more detailed than most people. We really want to make sure that we cross all those T's and dot those I's. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless.